This is Thank You Mama, weekly lessons from mothers all around the world. Hello and welcome to Thank You Mama. My name is Anna Tyler. My guest today is Meredith Maran. Meredith is a book author, a book critic, and a journalist. She has published 12 nonfiction books. Several of them became bestsellers, and a very successful first novel. Meredith writes features and essays and reviews for People magazine, Los Angeles magazine, Washington Post, New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and many other outlets. I am a big fan of Meredith's book, Why We Write, which is compiled of stories of 20 American best-selling authors who write about why they write, the urge to write. I can really, really highly recommend the book. And Meredith also wrote Why We Write About Ourselves, which I should read as an author of 2 memoirs. Meredith, I promise I will order it. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and thanks for you and your enthusiasm.
Yeah, I'm so excited you're here, and I have flashbacks on when we met 2013 at the Happier Hours, which was a very fun monthly meeting of women who write, and there was always a wonderful author presenting one of her books, and you were there presenting Why We Write.
Yes, those were great days. We would have authors come into town and host them for reading and a book signing and delicious food, and it was just wonderful.
It was wonderful.
Glad you got to go.
I miss those. I miss them so much. Are they not happening in LA anymore?
Not in the same form. It's sort of morphed into some different things, but yes, it's not exactly the same anymore. And then COVID,
Oh, COVID, yes.
Everything, yeah.
No, it's a black hole in my mind. Which COVID? What are you talking about?
Yeah, right.
Oh, 2 years, lost 2 years, it's sad. It's going to get better. Tell me about your work, and tell me about your books and your writing.
It started a long time ago. That's the biggest thing. I published a poem when I was 6 years old in a magazine called Highlights for Kids, which was a publication distributed through all the public schools in the States. And that was it for me. As soon as I realized I could write something and someone would print it, and then I got to read it in front of my whole school, and I heard the applause, saw my name in it, all the ego things sprung to life for me. So that was kind of the beginning. And then I always had been writing. I'd been writing just for myself from the time I could hold a pencil. It was my way of, and still is, my way of kind of coping with the good and the bad in life. I always wanted an audience, and whether there was just me as the audience of one or I was writing for a publication, it always was very satisfying to me to sort of condense my thoughts, my experiences, the world into words.
Did you study writing? Did you go to school for it? Because in Europe, you don't study writing. You just become a writer.
I hated school. Parents, close your children's ears. I really could not stand sitting down. I couldn't stand being still. I couldn't stand, the structure of it. So, no, I just did it. My father wanted to be a writer. He wrote a lot of plays that never got produced, but he really enjoyed doing it. And I grew up very cognizant of the level of rejection if you try to, get public recognition for your work. But I also grew up knowing that writing was a thing you could do, and I really wanted to do it. So
you just jumped into it?
I can't remember a time that I wasn't doing it.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
You're like my mom. My mom was a very famous movie actress.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and she never studied acting.
Interesting.
She never started acting, and she claims that that's where her quality came from, because she was very, very natural on screen. And she kept being asked about this, and she always said that she thinks the school would destroy her acting if she ever
that's
took
so
classes.
interesting.
And when writing discovered me, and I published my books, and then I was thinking about, should I try getting an MA or something? That stayed with me. I'm like, no, I think if I went somewhere and tried to learn something, it would just destroy what's already here.
Well, that's so interesting, because now I'm in a writing group, which I love, with a few friends, and all of them have, I think, 2 out of 4 have MFAs, and one has been to college, and they often talk about things I have no idea what they're talking about. And I can tell from the way they're talking about it that it came from a workshop or something that they learned in their MFA programs. And sometimes I feel a little longing, like maybe I would be a better writer or a better reader if I had that experience. But I also feel like the things I love about writing, whether it's mine or someone else's, really feel natural. They don't feel like they need to be tamed, I guess I would say. Yeah.
One last question. 12 books is a lot. Do you have a favorite?
It's actually 14 when you count 14? The novel, and and 15 if you count. I published, when I was just starting to write again as an adult, I wrote a lot of poetry. That was how I got started back with writing, and I didn't even try to get it published by a mainstream press. I just took it to the copy store and made books and had readings. And anyway, I think that might be my favorite book, to tell you the truth. It's a little spiral bound thing that cost me, I think, $3 to produce. And I think very often about the poems. Yeah, I really love them.
I love it. Let's tell my listeners how we got here.
Okay.
We got here because I was on Instagram and I saw a picture you posted of yourself with your mom. And I forgot what the words were exactly, but you wrote something about how you had a complex, let me put it that way, relationship, and now you are friends. And I got so excited because I love these stories. When I created this podcast, I really wanted to avoid the trap of it being just glorification of mothers. And this is why I love having guests who had a little different and more complex relationships with their moms, and they still learn something from them. So I wrote to you and I'm like, Meredith, I love this. Be my guest. And I'm very excited you're here.
Yeah, well, it's true. My mother and I were the worst of enemies for 69 years. And do you want me to tell you the story of what changed? Okay.
I do. But maybe first let's introduce Mom. Her name is Rita. Will you tell me a little bit about her? Where is she from and what her life was like?
Yeah, she's going to be 93 in 2 weeks. And she grew up, same as my father, same as my brother and me, in New York City. They both grew up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And their parents, both sets of their parents, were brought to the U.S. as infants from what was then Poland and Russia, but now I think the countries' names are all different, but not Russia, but yeah. And Jewish and escaping the pogroms. And so they grew up in very much first-generation families. A lot of fear, especially after the Holocaust, and a lot of shame, I think I would say. There was, unfortunately, it's a side effect. I've experienced it myself many times. A side effect of grief sometimes is, when things are so awful, you just start believing that you brought it on yourself in some way. And there was a lot of that, I know, in my grandparents. And she My father started dating when they were 13, and they got married when they were 19. And it was a very traditional and pretty terrible marriage. My mother obviously was destined for greater things, and she was confined to the home pretty much. As my brother and I got older, she engaged with some more sort of civic activities and started getting outside the house and developing hobbies and a lot of social activism. Like I remember one year she decided that if all the garbage trucks in Manhattan were painted shocking pink, it would be a lot nicer landscape. So
I love it.
She did a big campaign
That
to
sounds
try
like
to make
something
that
my mom
happen.
would do.
Really?
My mom was
Yeah.
trying to get all the bridges, like the metal bridges in Croatia, to be painted in the colors of rainbow.
Oh my God, that's so great. Wow, that's so funny. Yeah. So then my parents divorced when I was 19, and they were, I don't know, I think they'd been married maybe 25 years, and they split up. Well, first they moved to Europe. They moved to London, actually, which I guess is no longer considered part of Europe. And they split up there. And pretty soon after that, my brother's first daughter was born, and my mother moved to Berkeley to be near us. Yeah. So then she became a human rights activist, and she founded a human rights organization, and has been extremely busy with that ever since, to this day.
Oh, at 93, she's still working.
Oh, yeah.
That's amazing.
Absolutely. I know. Sometimes she asks me for help with her computer, and I look, and there's, 22,000 unread emails, and I'm just like, Mom, you have to,
wow.
you have to slow down.
What are her causes?
That's really, human rights is her specialty. I mean, she's very progressive, and she's an activist for all causes. We all marched when who was elected, and she put on her pussy hat and marched with the other women. And so she's definitely a big feminist and anti-racist, and all forms of human rights is really her specialty.
Oh wow, Mama Rita, amazing. But now you can tell me your story.
With her, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we just never got along. It's one thing to have a mother whose politics you agree with, but it's another thing to have a mother you get along with. And I've met a lot of women who have this similar experience. They admire their mothers for their work in the world, or, the things they do, but they just can't get along. And I always knew my mother was a special woman, especially for her times. But at the same time, we just were at each other's throats all the time. I mean, we really could not be in the same room. We couldn't, see eye to eye. I ran away from home when I was 16 because I just thought, I can't live like this. And it was really a nightmare. It was so sad. I mean, we were both really sad about it for decades. And we went to therapy together. More than once. And, we just tried everything. We would try staying up all night talking and trying to resolve things. And we just, we both really wanted it to be better all the time, but it just never could be.
And what changed it? How did you?
Well, I have to say, in a very simplified way, the pandemic, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners will relate to, that, with all the tragedy of the pandemic, also, I certainly know a lot of people who rethought what mattered to them, what they wanted from life, how fragile life was. And especially, my mother being that age, and when the pandemic started, I was 68. So I was very much in the category also of being at high risk. And I had a lung condition when I was a child, so that added to the risk. And I also was not, before the pandemic, a very careful person. I just remember thinking of all the things that I'm sure you remember the beginning when they were telling us nobody knew really how it spread, and they were just telling us all these crazy things when we were all washing our groceries and, segregating our mail and all this stuff. And I just thought, I am not a careful enough person to survive this. I'm just never going to be able to take things slowly enough and pay enough attention to detail that I would be able to protect myself. So, and with her age, between the two of us, we both, I think, I know because we talked about it, we both really thought we might die from this. It seemed likely. And I think that definitely had an impact on our motivation and putting things in perspective, of what mattered. And I felt so protective of her. And at first I was angry at her, as I always was, for not protecting herself. She would do these crazy things. We were having family Zooms almost every night for the first 6 months, which is amazing, with our whole extended family. And we would check in and my mother would say, oh, yes, I was at Trader Joe's this morning. And I was like, Mom, I haven't been in a grocery store in 6 months. You need to stay home. We'll get you Instacart, whatever. And she was like, no, I have to go out and take a walk and see my friends and be in the world. And every day we would get on those Zooms and we would say, well, where did you go for your COVID dose today, Mom? Like, we were just we couldn't do anything about it. She refused to protect herself. And at first it just made me mad the way anything to do with her always made me mad. But then I just realized I would feel terrible if she died. It wasn't just that I was annoyed. It was that I didn't want to lose her. And I think that definitely began a process of seeing each other differently. One incident that happened right when COVID was starting, we weren't in lockdown yet, because my brother lives near my mother in Berkeley, and she said she wanted to let us know what was going to be in her will, and she called a meeting. My brother was with her in her apartment, but I was in LA. And we were doing just FaceTime. It was before I think we'd heard the word Zoom in the context that we all know it now. And she told us that she had willed all her money which was not, it was for a lot more than we thought, but it was not that. It's not like my mother's rich. We never thought, believe me, neither of us ever did our financial planning thinking that our mother would help us. And she told us she was going to give all her money basically to different nonprofits that she believed in. And of course, I agree. The whole list was in her will, and we were reading the list, and they're all causes that I agree with. But it made me so sad. And I started crying, and I never cried in front of my mother because it would have made me feel too vulnerable. And I started crying, and she said, why are you crying? And I said, don't you love your kids? Don't you love your grandkids? At that point, she had 5 grandkids too, 4 grandkids. No, more than 4. I don't know, 5 great grandkids and a bunch of great grandkids. And I said, why are you giving your money to strangers? And I said, it's not that I want your money. It's that I want us to change our story. I don't want you to die, and I'm hearing your will being read. And instead of doing a little something thoughtful for your kids, you're giving it to strangers. And that's just going to make me go, I'll live the rest of my life with this story that we've had all these years. And I said, do you want to change our story? And she got teary-eyed, which also never happened. And she said, I do. And that was it. Oh, wow. That was it.
Was that the moment?
I don't know that was the moment. And I don't know why then, and not all the hundreds of times we had tried so many things to get along and staying away from each other and everything we could think of. And then suddenly we just saw each other in a different light. And the whole issue of the will went away. It wasn't really about the will. It was about our relationship. So after that, I don't know. We started with some I look back on them now, they seem kind of silly rules, but we needed some rules because we had fought so much for so long that we needed some ground rules. And the first thing we agreed to was that we wouldn't talk about anything that was more than 2 weeks old.
I love
And
that.
that
That's
solved
fantastic.
90% of the problems right
wow.
there. Yeah.
I should do
Because
that with
all
my
of our
husband.
yeah, I know. I mean, many, many spiritual practices and psychological practices recommend it, but who really does it?
Yeah. Because the wounds are so deep
The
and old
wounds.
and
Yes. And also, the only reason to talk about the past really is to prove that the other person was wrong.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's really no unifying reason.
Yeah.
And it was just divisive. So we made that agreement with no problem at all. We both, without talking about it, it was just like, let's just make this agreement. And we both said, from now on, that's it. No more talking about the past. And we stopped. And it was a big habit. So it was very hard to stop. And, both of us would start to do it. And then the other one would say, and she would stop.
Oh.
And yeah. And then because of COVID, we were seeing each other on these family Zooms, and my whole family was shocked because they were all seeing that we were being nice to each other and they couldn't believe it because it had been it really ruined our family life because, we couldn't really just hang out as a family. It was always fighting and, just tension and who's on whose side. And, it was horrible. And all of a sudden they were all saying, what is happening with you two? And it just went on like that. We did that for at least 6 months, almost every night. And then I started noticing that whereas in the past I had, I was trying to be a good daughter, so I would call my mother or whatever, but I never wanted to. I always dreaded it. And when I did it, I always felt worse when I got off the phone than when I got on the phone. And it was like really unmotivating, because who wants to feel worse? And I knew I would. And then all of a sudden I noticed that if we didn't have a family Zoom one night, that I would call her anyway, because I just wanted to talk to her, which was insane. I just couldn't believe that. But it was true. So, yeah. And then over those months, we just got into the habit of talking all the time.
Have you seen her since then?
Yes. We saw each other for the first time Mother's Day, this past Mother's Day in May. We had a big family gathering. And the night before the gathering, I said to my mother, we are going to hug each other for the first time in our lives tomorrow.
Oh my God.
And she said, And she said, I know, I've been thinking about that. And nobody could believe that in 69 years, my mother and I had never hugged, but it was 100% true.
That's incredible.
I know. And she came in the house. I was there, and oh my God, it was so emotional. And the whole family was kind of in a little circle, especially the little kids, the grandkids and great grandkids were just around us, just like their mouths were hanging open. It's not that often that you get to see a mother and daughter hug for the first time in 69 years, It's really something.
I'm speechless. I'm so deeply touched. Because I'm thinking about what a present you got. Like it must be incredible that at 69 you got your mom.
Exactly.
That's
I don't
incredible.
even know what words. I'm like you. I mean,
no.
The reason I don't know if you saw
Are you writing about it?
Well, I was just going to ask if you saw the story I did for O Magazine, the Oprah magazine.
No, I have to read it. No. Can we attach the link to episode notes so the listeners can read it?
Well, I have a link to my website, has it posted there, so you can see it there.
Okay, so I'll put it in the episode notes so whoever is listening, if they want to read, they can find it.
Great. Yeah, it's a short piece, but what happened was, my people, my friends, and I'm also in AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, and I told my sponsor, of course, she was aware when she met me. My mother was my worst enemy. And now suddenly she was hearing these stories of my mother and me. And she's a writer too. And she said, you have to write about this. So I wrote to O Magazine, which I've written for a few times before, and they took it right away. I wrote them like a letter. It wasn't even an article. It was like a pitch, but just telling them what was happening, the basics. And they printed it. They just wrote me and said, we're going to print it as is. And I was like, what? That was just my notes. Yeah. But fine. So they did. Yeah. And my mother and I actually wrote it together because she happened to be here. It was during that time in May that she was here, and we worked on it together. And then they had to interview her to make sure, to fact check and make sure that everything I said about her was true. And she was sitting in my car. We were doing it on the car phone. And she said, she whispered to me, everything you wrote is wrong, but I'm not going to tell them that. Some things never change. She never agreed with a single word I've written. So she kept to it, but in a way it made it better because it was like she was sacrificing her own version of events in order to support me in my career and getting the word out. So it was really nice.
Meredith, this is so beautiful. I'm very deeply touched and excited and happy for you. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Let's jump into lessons. You sent me some very, very beautiful lessons. I can't wait for you to share them.
Well, let's see. The first one, I'm just looking to see what I wrote you.
Do you want me to tell you?
I do. I want you to tell me.
I love this one. Don't give up before the miracle.
Yes. This is something I learned from Alcoholics Anonymous. They always say, I have my list in front of me now. I'll spare you. That it's a general thing for life. I think that, there's many ways, many cliches that mention this, that, it's always darkest before the dawn or whatever, or for people who are ill to keep fighting because you never know when they're going to come up with a better treatment and things like this. And in AA, like obviously when you're trying to stay sober, it can be very painful. And there are many, many times when you're going through that process that you just feel like it's not worth it, and it is never going to happen. Maybe you can stay sober, but you can't ever feel good. So what's the point? You're always going to be struggling with wanting to drink or use drugs or whatever. So that's really where I learned this expression, don't quit before the miracle, because in fact, a lot of people, when I'm in an AA meeting, will say, I was at the absolute end of my rope. I couldn't stand another day like this. I didn't see how I would ever be one of those people who's in a meeting and says, oh, my AA saved my life and all this. And then the very next day, something happened that changed my life, And I've heard so many of those stories that it has really taught me, I think it really helped me with my mother to believe that something that seemed impossible was actually possible.
Yeah. What a beautiful lesson.
Yeah. And then I just jotted down a few others when you asked, that no one is all one thing, good or evil, not even your mother, or maybe especially your mother, because I think I think it's very easy to see certain people in your life. I know I've done this with my AA sponsors, with teachers of different kinds, that, you want to believe that somebody is perfect. And that whatever they say, you can rely on it and believe it, and that they're always going to be there for you in exactly the right way. And it's just not true. And conversely, my mother nobody could have been the demon that I made her out to be. No one is all bad. And finally, I had to realize that about myself before I could realize it about her. Because, of course, hating my mother did not make me feel good about myself. I had horrible self-esteem about all this. I thought, who doesn't love her mother? That's just awful. And it made me feel very evil or mean-spirited. And it didn't go at all with my politics. I'm an activist because I believe everything can change. You can't be an activist and think people can't change. Those two things don't go together, because for the world to change, people have to change. So that was a big thing I learned, was just to look for the good, even in the people you think are the worst, or to be able to tolerate the imperfections in people you think are perfect or you want to be perfect. Yeah. And then another one is, this is a very common saying, but I think it's so apt.
Is it a
Anger
common
is like
saying?
drink. You've never heard it before?
I've never heard it before, and I so needed to hear it.
Yeah. Well, I think I hear a lot of things in AA that I don't know if they come from AA or people are just bringing them in from the world. But anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I think that is such a good, it's like, well, I'm righteously angry, and we get really attached to our anger because, again, anger proves the other person is wrong.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. It doesn't prove anything. In fact, I've learned that the more convinced I am that I'm right, when I really, really know that my point of view is okay, I don't have to fight with anybody about it. I just know it. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter to me if anyone agrees with me. It just matters that it's true and I know it, and it makes me calm. And so that's one thing I've learned is about anger. And the last one that I sent you is everyone can change if they want to, or if life forces them to, even at 92, even at 69. So yeah, a lot of people who have followed the story of my mother and me will comment that, well, first that when they find out that I'm 70, and then when they find out she's 92, that, oh my God, it's one thing to change when you're a teenager or something, everybody changes, but at these ages, don't you just become who you are and there's no changing? Well, the answer to that is clearly no. That's not true.
It's very hard to believe people can change,
It's hard to believe people can change at all. And a lot of people can't, and they don't. And I have found in my life, the main things that have made me change are one extreme or the other, being wildly in love and happy, or being really desperate and miserable. It's very hard to change when everything is just status quo and things are fine. Why change?
It's true.
And the answer is because you can always be better. You can always be happier. You can always be giving back more. There's always a reason to change, but you don't feel it unless you're miserable, unfortunately, because it's work. It's hard. So, yeah.
Meredith, this is beautiful and so deep, and the whole story is so incredible. Normally, I ask my guests a question for which I've learned it might be even, I dare say, the most important question in these interviews, which is normally, was there anything your mother was not able to teach you, anything important your mother was not able to teach you, that you had to learn yourself?
Definitely. So many things. And I'm still working on her. I still, she's a lot closer to the Holocaust generation than I am. And she has really deep-seated fear and pessimism and anxiety. And, she always sees, well, I won't say always, but a lot of times she sees the worst version of how things are. And I am working on her to lose that, to try to see the possibilities of positive change instead of always negative. It's interesting because even with our triumph, with this great proof that things can get better, she still will default to the worst case scenario. And that's the main thing I've had to teach myself, because I really don't want to live with that. She's just many times, especially with the state of the world, she'll just be so freaked out and convinced that the worst thing is going to happen. And I know why. I mean, I grew up with Holocaust survivors, and I know that it's very hard to leave that behind. But anyway, I'd say that's the biggest thing, is about anxiety.
Is there anything else you'd like to share before we recap?
Well, I would just encourage anyone who's listening, even if your relationship with your mom is whether it's you think it's perfect or whether it's terribly troubled, just think about what matters. A lot of what happened for me was that I realized if she died and we were in that state, or I died for that matter, and we were in the state we were in, I would have never been happy the rest of my life. I would have always felt that I wasn't the kind of person who could get over myself enough to love my mother. So I think it's sort of that giving the other person poison idea that, don't let your pride or your need to be right or your self-righteousness get in the way of healing things with your mother.
Meredith, I'm thinking about, Thank You Mama is growing and it's going to become a beautiful book one day. I started working on workshops because I'm dreaming of getting women together, and to talk about these experiences and lessons and their mothers and what we learn from them and what we take and what we should just drop and what we should keep. So right now, thinking about this workshop, I had a beautiful relationship with my mom. It wasn't perfect. Nobody is perfect. But I'm reading a lot of books about the mother wound and, mothers who can't love and things like that. Because that definitely has to be a part of it. And now I'm dreaming of having you there at my first workshop.
Oh, well,
to share
I'd be
your story.
Delighted.
Come to Vienna next
Especially
summer.
if you invite me to Vienna
to
for
Vienna,
it.
definitely. It's a deal. Meredith, let's recap just at the end. So we learned from you and from Mama Rita the one most important lesson, which is don't give up before the miracle. That nobody and nothing is just plain good or evil. Not even your mother. I love that. That anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I love that, but I've never heard it. And that everyone can change if they want to. Or if life forces them to, and that's great to remember. And you know what I also wrote from you? That you can always be better and you can always be happier.
Yeah, it's true.
And something she did not teach you, was not able to teach you, is to lose the anxiety and lose the fear and the pessimism, which I love how you absolutely understand where it comes from. But at one point we have to leave it behind. I love that. Did I miss anything?
I think you covered it all.
Great. Meredith, thank you so much for this beautiful story. It's so inspiring and beautiful.
You are so welcome, and thank you so much.
If you enjoy Thank You Mama and want to help it grow, please take the 2 seconds to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps. If you'd like to get in touch, you can send me a mail at info@thankyouMama.net. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter under Anna Teider. That's TAJDER. This was Thank You Mama. Come back next week, subscribe, and tell your friends.